Van Halen.
Van Halen is an American rock band formed in Pasadena, California, in 1972. From 1974 until 1985 the band comprised guitarist Eddie Van Halen, vocalist David Lee Roth, drummer Alex Van Halen and bassist Michael Anthony. This lineup was changed when David Lee Roth was replaced as vocalist by Sammy Hagar. Critics and fans alike consider their 1978 self-titled debut album Van Halen to be one of the most original and revolutionary albums to change rock and roll. The band went on to further success, and by the early 1980s they were one of the most successful rock acts of the time. 1984 was their most successful album. The lead single, Jump, became an international hit and their only single to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The following singles, Panama, and I'll Wait, both hit number 13 on the U.S. charts. The album went on to sell over 12 million copies in the U.S. alone. In 1985, the band replaced lead singer David Lee Roth with ex-Montrose lead vocalist Sammy Hagar. With Hagar, the group would release 4 U.S. #1 albums over the course of 11 years. Hagar left the band in 1996 shortly before the release of the band's first greatest hits collection, Best of, Volume IX. Extreme frontman Gary Cherone was quickly recruited as lead singer to replace Hagar, and Van Halen 3 was released in 1998. Cherone left the band in frustration in 1999 after the tour due to the poor commercial performance of the album. Van Halen went on hiatus until 2003 when they reunited with Hagar for a worldwide tour. The reunited band released a second greatest hits collection the following year, The Best of Both Worlds. Like Volume I before it, The Best of Both Worlds included material from both the Roth and Hagar eras but omitted any Cherone-era tracks. The album featured 3 brand new tracks recorded by the reunited band, 2 of which were released as singles. Hagar again left Van Halen in 2005 and in 2006, Roth returned as lead vocalist for their highest-grossing tour, and one of the highest-grossing tours of that year. Anthony was not invited to participate in the tour and was essentially fired from the band, replaced by Wolfgang Van Halen, Eddie's son. In 2012, the band released the commercially and critically successful, A Different Kind of Truth, with Roth as lead vocalist. According to the RIAA, Van Halen is the 19th best-selling band artist in United States history, selling 56 million albums in the US and 96.5 million albums worldwide. They were also revealed at number 4 on the Billboard's Top Money Makers list in 2013. Van Halen is one of only 5 rock bands that have had 2 studio albums sell more than 10 million copies in the US. Additionally, Van Halen charted the most #1 hits in the history of Billboard's mainstream rock chart. Van Halen achieved worldwide fame for their many popular songs and larger-than-life stage performances. Unfortunately, they also became known for the drama surrounding the departures of former members. Controversy surrounded the band following the exits of Roth, Hagar, and Anthony. This controversy often included numerous conflicting press statements between the former members and the band. In 2007, Van Halen was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. VH1 ranked them 7th on their list of the top 100 hard rock artists of all time.
History. Formation and early history 1972-77.
Born in Nijmegen, Netherlands, Edward Van Halen and Alex Van Halen are the sons of musician Jan Van Halen. Young Edward first began studying classical piano, and became quite proficient, although he never fully mastered the art of reading sheet music. Eventually the Van Halen brothers started playing music together in the 1960s, Eddie on drums and Alex on guitar. While Eddie was delivering newspapers to pay for his new drum set, Alex would sneak over and play them. Eventually Eddie found out about it, and out of frustration he told Alex, "Okay, you play drums and I'll go play your guitar." In 1972, the Van Halen brothers formed a band called Genesis featuring Eddie as lead vocalist guitarist, Alex on drums, and Mark Stone on bass. They initially rented a sound system from David Lee Roth but decided to save money by letting him join as lead vocalist even though his previous audition, had been unsuccessful. By 1974 the band decided to replace Stone, so Michael Anthony, bassist and lead vocalist from local band Snake, was auditioned. Following an all-night jam session, he was hired for bass and backing vocals. The band later changed its name to Mammoth when they discovered the name Genesis was already being used. In 1974, Mammoth officially changed its name to Van Halen. According to Roth, this was his brainchild. He felt it was a name that had power, like Santana. He played backyard parties and on a flatbed truck at Hamilton Park. Van Halen played clubs in Pasadena and Hollywood to growing audiences, increasing their popularity through self-promotion. Before each gig they would pass out flyers at local high schools. This soon built them a major following. Later that year, the band got its first break when it was hired to play at Gazzarri's, a formerly famous but down-at-the-heels nightclub on the Sunset Strip which closed in 1996. Earlier, they had auditioned for the owner, Bill Gazzarri, but he claimed they were too loud, and would not hire them. But their new managers, Mark Algari and Mario Miranda, who had coincidentally taken over Gazzarri's hiring, did the deal. Shortly afterwards, they recorded their first demo tape at the now-defunct Cherokee Studios in Northridge where Steely Dan recently had completed an album. Van Halen became a staple of the Los Angeles music scene during the mid-1970s, playing at well-known clubs like the Whiskey A Go Go. According to a January 4, 1977, LA Times article entitled Homegrown Punk by Robert Hilburn, Rodney Bingenheimer saw Van Halen at the Gazzarri Club in the summer of 1976, so he took Gene Simmons of Kiss to see Van Halen. Gene Simmons then produced a Van Halen demo tape with recording beginning at the Village Recorder Studios in Los Angeles and finished with overdubs at the Electric Lady Studios in New York. Simmons wanted to change the band's name to Daddy Long Legs, but the band stuck with Van Halen. Simmons then opted out of further involvement after he took the demo to Kiss management and was told that they had no chance of making it, and that they wouldn't take them. In mid-1977 Mo Ostin and Ted Templeman of Warner Bros. Records saw Van Halen perform at the Starwood in Hollywood. Although the audience was small, the two were so impressed with Van Halen that within a week they offered the band a recording contract. The group recorded their debut album at Sunset Sound Recorders Studio in mid-September to early October 1977, recording guitar parts for 1 week and then recording vocals for 2 additional weeks. All of the tracks were laid down with little overdubbing or double tracking. Minor mistakes were purposely left on the record and a simple musical setup was used to give the record a live feel. During this time they continued to play various venues in Southern California, including some notable concerts at the Pasadena Convention Center produced by their promoter and impresario, Steve Tortomasi, himself a fixture in the local rock and roll scene.
David Lee Roth era, rise to fame and commercial peak 1978 to 1985.
Upon its release, Van Halen reached number 19 on the Billboard pop music charts, one of rock's most commercially successful debuts. It was highly regarded as both a heavy metal and hard rock album. The album included songs now regarded as Van Halen classics, like Runnin' with the Devil, and the guitar solo Eruption, which showcased Eddie's use of a technique known as finger tapping. The band toured for nearly a year, opening for Black Sabbath and establishing a reputation for their performances. The band's chemistry owed much to Eddie Van Halen's technical guitar wizardry and David Lee Roth's flamboyant antics, strong points which later made them rivals. The band returned to the studio in late 1978 to record Van Halen 2, a 1979 album similar in style to their debut. This record yielded the band's first hit single, Dance the Night Away. Over the next few years, the band alternated album releases and touring, see Van Halen concert tours. Their Women and Children first album was released in 1980 and further cemented Van Halen's status. But in 1981, during the recording of the Fair Warning album, tensions rose. Eddie's desire for more serious and complex songs was at odds with Roth's poppy style. Nonetheless, Roth, and producer Templeman, acquiesced to Eddie's wishes. Diver Down performed better. The band then earned a spot in the Guinness Book of World Records for the highest paid single appearance of a band, $1.5 million for a 90-minute set at the 1983 U.S. festival. Despite this return to form, Roth and Eddie's differences continued, and this caused friction with other band members. Billy Sheehan, after his band Talas completed a tour with Van Halen, claims he was approached by Eddie Van Halen to replace Michael Anthony. The reasons for this were never clear to Sheehan because nothing came out of it. During this time Eddie and Alex Van Halen contributed the score and instrumental songs to the movie The Wild Life, starring Eric Stoltz. The score was heavy on the keyboards, similar to the sound used on the previous two albums and much more like the sound coming in their next album. 1984, released on January 9, 1984, was their commercial pinnacle. Recorded at Eddie Van Halen's newly built 5150 Studios, the album featured keyboards, which had only been used sporadically on previous albums. The lead single, Jump, featured a synthesizer hook and anthemic lyrics, and became the band's first and only #1 pop hit, garnering them a Grammy nomination. Other singles included Panama, No 13 US, I'll Wait, also number 13 US, and Hot for Teacher. 3 of the songs had popular music videos on MTV. 1984 was praised by critics and fans alike, peaking at number 2 on the Billboard charts behind Michael Jackson's Thriller. The album, however, was also a breaking point for the band. In the midst of the 1984 tour, the artistic and personal tensions among the musicians reached a fever pitch. Reasons for the breakup vary based on the band member interviewed, but were rooted in control of the band's sound and image. Roth was upset about Eddie playing music outside of Van Halen without checking with the band, and his alleged drug abuse that allegedly prevented the band from viable practices. Roth was also having a successful solo career with a hit song and EP, a remake of the Beach Boys' classic California Girls, number 3 US, and the old standard Just a Gigolo, number 12 US. Roth was also offered a $20 million film deal for a script entitled Crazy from the Heat. Roth hoped Van Halen would contribute the soundtrack. However, the film deal fell through when MGM Pictures was sold in 1986.
Sammy Hagar era, changing style and a string of #1 albums 1986 to 1996.
Eddie invited Patti Smith of Scandal to replace Roth, but she refused. Eddie was then introduced by way of a mutual auto mechanic to Sammy Hagar, formerly of 1970s band Montrose, and at that time a solo artist coming off a very successful year. His hit single I Can't Drive 55 came from his 1984 album VOA, produced by Ted Temperman, who had also produced Hagar's first album Montrose, as well as all of Van Halen's albums up to that point. Hagar agreed to join and also serve as a rhythm guitarist on stage to add to the Van Halen sound. The 1986 Van Halen album 5150 was a huge hit, becoming the band's first #1 album on the Billboard charts, driven by the keyboard-dominated singles, Why Can't This Be Love, number 3 US, Dreams, and Love Walks In, top 30 US. To further introduce the new era for the band, a new Van Halen logo was put on the cover. The new logo retained elements of the original, but now the lines extending from either side of VH wrapped around and formed a ring. Following the release of the 5150 album, a tour was launched to support it across North America. Named the 1986 tour, the title was a homage to the previous 1984 tour in support of the 1984 album. Footage was released on VHS and DVD as Live Without a Net. In the tour, Hagar wanted to minimize the use of pre-Hagar Van Halen songs in the set, other than the band's best-known classics. This was a trend that continued, with the expanding repertoire of Hagar-era songs slowly whittling away at the number of Roth-era songs on the setlist. All 4 studio albums produced during this period reached #1 on the Billboard Pop Music charts, and 17 singles breached the top 12 of the mainstream rock tracks chart. During that era, a single taken from 1988's OU 812, When It's Love, reached the top 5, peaking at number 5. In addition, Van Halen was nominated for 2 Grammy Awards, winning the 1992 Best Hard Rock Performance with Vocal Award for the album for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Van Halen continued to enjoy success throughout the mid-90s. In 1995, Van Halen released the album Balance and supported Bon Jovi on their European Summer Stadium tour. They also made a live album called Live, Right Here, Right Now. During the recording of songs for the film Twister, escalating tension between Hagar and the Van Halen brothers boiled over and Hagar departed on Father's Day, 1996. The band had recorded a song, Humans Being, for which Eddie claimed he had to write all the lyrics since Hagar's were too cheesy. This upset Hagar, and when they were to record a second song for the soundtrack, Hagar was in Hawaii. He wasn't keen on doing soundtrack work since it would make the music hard to obtain for fans, abusing them, so the second track the band were due to record became an Eddie Alex instrumental, Respect the Wind. The band was also working on a compilation album. This led to conflicts with Hagar and the group's new manager, Ray Daniels, Ed LaFella's replacement and Alex Van Halen's former brother-in-law, even though it was former manager Ed LaFella who renewed their contract with Warner Brothers. Records and added in the best of album option years before. Hagar was reluctant to work on a compilation album before a new album came out. The band fell out, leaving the management siding with Eddie and Alex. Hagar also had concerns over comparisons on an album which featured both his work and Roth's. Hagar claimed that he was fired. Van Halen claimed that he quit.
A temporary reunion with Roth 1996.
David Lee Roth called Eddie to discuss what tracks would be included on a planned Van Halen compilation, work on which actually began before Hagar's departure. They got along well, and Eddie invited him up to his house studio. Shortly afterwards, David Lee Roth re-entered the studio with the band and producer Glenn Ballard. 2 songs from those sessions were added to the band's Greatest Hits album and released as singles to promote it. In September, Van Halen was asked to present an award at the 1996 MTV Video Music Awards. They agreed, and on September 4, 1996, the 4 original members of Van Halen made their first public appearance together in over 11 years. This helped to bring the compilation to number 1 on the US album charts. However, unknown to Roth, Eddie and Alex were still auditioning other singers, including Mitch Malloy. The band's appearance on the 1996 MTV Video Music Awards fueled reunion speculation. Several weeks after the awards show, it was discovered Roth was out of Van Halen again. Roth released a statement in which he apologized to the media and to fans, stating that he was an unwitting participant in a Van Halen publicity stunt by them and manager Ray Daniels. The next day, Eddie and Alex released their own statement, claiming they were completely honest with Roth and never suggested he was guaranteed to be the next lead singer. Eddie Van Halen would later explain, in regard to the MTV Video Music Awards appearance, that he had initially been embarrassed by Roth's antics while on camera behind Beck, who was giving an acceptance speech for the award that Van Halen had presented to him. Immediately following this, the band had been taken to a backstage press conference where press queries about a reunion tour were met with Eddie Van Halen saying that he needed a hip replacement and would have to record an entire new studio album before any tour. In private, Roth told Eddie to avoid talking about negative things like his hip, and the two almost came to blows, thereby shattering any chance of a full-scale reunion.
Gary Cherone era, decline in popularity 1996-99.
Van Halen's next lead singer was Gary Cherone, frontman of the then-defunct Boston-based band Extreme, a group which had enjoyed some popular success in the early 1990s. The result was the album Van Halen 3. Many songs were longer and more experimental than Van Halen's earlier work. It was a notable contrast from their previous material, with more focus on ballads than traditional rock songs, How Many Say I, with Eddie on vocals. Sales were poor by the band's standards, only reaching gold certification, despite the album peaking at number 4 on the US charts. Van Halen 3 did produce a hit, however, Without You, and additionally the song Fire in the Hole appeared on the Lethal Weapon 4 soundtrack. The album was followed by a tour. The three tours saw Van Halen playing in new countries, including first-ever visits to Australia and New Zealand. Shortly afterwards, Van Halen returned to the studio and in early 1999, they started work on a new album. Working titles of songs included Left for Dead, River Wide, Say Uncle, You Wear It Well, More Than Yesterday, I Don't Miss You Much, Love Divine, and From Here, Where Do We Go? The project was left unfinished when Cherone left the band amicably in November 1999. Citing musical differences, it is likely Three's poor sales and critical reception had a big impact. None of the material from these sessions has ever been released, and in fact the band released no new material at all, aside from 3 new songs included on the 2004 Best of Both Worlds compilation, in the years following until January 10, 2012. Lyrics that Cherone had written for the Van Halen 3 follow-up would be used in his next project with Tribe of Judah. Touring with Cherone has proven disappointing in terms of attendance. Eddie would later admit that the powers that be, Warner Brothers, had forced his hand in parting with Cherone. Unlike with the previous 2 singers, there was reportedly no bad blood behind the breakup, and Cherone remained in contact and on good terms with Van Halen. As when Hagar left, speculation resumed on a Roth reunion.
Hiatus from public 1999 to 2003.
Eddie recovered from his hip surgery in November 1999, but from 2000 to early 2004 no official statements were made by Van Halen and no music was released. However, information about members past and present trickled in. The Van Halen brothers continued writing at 5150 Studios. Gary Cherone recorded an album and toured with new band Tribe of Judah. One of the songs that Cherone had written for the scrapped second album with Van Halen, entitled Left for Dead, would see its lyrics set to a completely new musical arrangement with Tribe of Judah. Meanwhile, Hagar and Roth continued their solo careers. In 2000, the band worked with David Lee Roth, reported by Slaughterhouse, at 5150, writing new music before falling out again. Eddie kept quiet, but made a rare appearance at the Los Angeles Police Department charity golf tournament during May 2001. Any band progress would have been interrupted on October 15, 2001, when Eddie and his wife of 21 years, actress Valerie Bertinelli, separated, though the couple would not file for divorce until December 8, 2005. In November 2001, Anthony claimed Roth had been working with the band again for a few months, but lawyers had shut it down. Anthony later denied this. The band was also dropped from Warner Brothers Records, which had first signed them in 1978. More positively, Eddie underwent treatment for cancer and announced his recovery on Van Halen's website in May 2002. Eddie's only live performances during this period were joining Mountain to play Never in My Life in August 2002 and a private audience jam at NAMM January 2003. This took place at the PA booth. PA produced Eddie's signature Wolfgang model guitar. Word quickly spread through the NAMM show that Eddie was to play at the PA booth, attracting a large amount of people. Eddie showed up late and drunk. When he finally appeared he was incoherent. As a result, PA chose not to offer an extension on their contract with Eddie, and thus stopped producing any EVH signature products. Fender, which had purchased Charvel Jackson, began a licensing deal with the EVH brand, including producing new amps and signature guitars, such as a copy of Eddie's famous Frankenstein Strat-style guitar. In the summer of 2002, David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar teamed up in the Song for Song, the Heavyweight Champs of Rock and Roll Tour, also known as the Sam's Halen or Sam and Dave Tour. The joint tour headlining both former lead singers attracted media and audience fascination because it seemed more improbable than even a Van Halen tour with Roth or Hagar could be. The tour drew large crowds and featured no opening acts, Roth and Hagar alternating opening as the first act during the tour. In an interview, Roth contrasted his personality with Hagar's, saying, "He's the kind of guy you go out with to split a bottle with a friend. I'm the kind of guy you go out with if you want to split your friend with a bottle." Michael Anthony guested with Hagar's band, the Waibaritas, numerous times and sometimes even sang lead vocals. During performances, Hagar would tease Anthony by asking, "Do the brothers know you're here?" Anthony never played with Roth. Gary Cherone appeared on occasion. Hagar released a live album, Hallelujah, featuring vocals by Mike and Gary, and a documentary DVD, Long Road to Cabo, about touring with Roth. Next, Hagar joined with Joe Satriani and Journey guitarist Neil Schon to form a side project, Planet Us, along with Michael Anthony and Dean Castronovo, also of Journey, on drums. The band recorded just 2 songs and played live a few times before dissolving when Hagar and Anthony rejoined Van Halen. While the 2 lead singers promoted the tour and publicly claimed mutual respect, rumors of bitter acrimony and mutual loathing between the 2 singers swirled. The allegations were later supported in backstage video, which showed Roth and Hagar camps maintaining strict separation. On July 4, 2004, Roth performed with one of the world's most popular orchestras, the Boston Pops, at United States' annual Pops Goes the 4th celebration in Boston. Hagar remained active, releasing 5 albums and creating his own merchandising brand Cabo Wabo, which lends its name to his line of tequila, as well as his franchise of cantinas. He reunited with Montrose in 2003 and 2005 for a few performances and maintained contact with Michael Anthony, often playing with him. With Van Halen inactive, Anthony set up a website and worked on merchandising projects such as his signature Yamaha bass and range of hot sauces. He became involved with the annual music industry NAMM show.
Reunion with Hagar 2003 to 2005.
During January 2003, the VHND, Van Halen News Desk, website reported that Sammy Hagar was working with the Van Halens. No official confirmation came for an extended period of time. In late March 2004, Van Halen and Sammy Hagar announced that Hagar would reunite with the band for a new compilation release and a summer concert tour of the USA. In July 2004, Van Halen released a new 2-CD compilation featuring 3 new songs with Hagar, It's About Time, Up for Breakfast, and Learning to See. These songs were newly written by the Van Halen brothers and Sammy Hagar. The songs were credited to Hagar Van Halen, which was unusual since normally the entire lineup, which also included Michael Anthony, would be credited. However, the performance was credited to the entire band. Michael Anthony would later reveal in interviews that Eddie Van Halen had in fact not wanted him to be a part of the reunion, and for this reason Anthony had not been allowed to perform in the sessions, explaining his lack of a songwriting credit, with Eddie playing the bass parts himself instead. However, Anthony did provide backing vocals for the 3 tracks. Though it was the only new album since the band's first greatest hits, no songs with Gary Cherone from Van Halen 3 were included. It was certified platinum in the USA in August 2004. The summer 2004 tour grossed almost $55 million, and Pollstar listed Van Halen in the top 10 grossing tours of 2004. Reviews of the tour, however, from professional reviewers proved to be mixed. On some shows, Eddie's son Wolfgang came on stage and played guitar with his father during 316, a song dedicated to his son, taking its name from his birthday. During the later stages of the tour, stories of Eddie being drunk began to surface along with fan-shot video footage of poor playing. At the band's final show of the tour, in Tucson, Eddie smashed one of his guitars at the end of the show. After the tour, things broke down. At first Hagar stated he had yet to decide what he would be doing with Van Halen, although he was still an official member of the band. Soon after, however, both Hagar and Anthony admitted that Eddie had problems with alcohol during the tour that affected everyone involved. Hagar stated that he was done with Van Halen, and wished that everyone would have taken it more seriously. Despite this, Eddie later described himself as satisfied with the tour. After the tour ended, Hagar returned to his solo band the Waibaritas, and Anthony appeared with him on tour occasionally. The band quickly faded from view after Hagar left again. In December 2005, Michael Anthony revealed in an interview with Mark and Brian that he had not talked with the Van Halens and was unsure of their plans.
second reunion with Roth 2006–2008.
Rumors of a David Lee Roth reunion re-emerged, and on January 3, 2006, Roth explained during an interview that he spoke to Alex Van Halen the previous week and a reunion was inevitable. However, he also said that Eddie Van Halen was off in his own little world recently. When asked if any problems occurred with Sammy Hagar during the 2004 tour, Eddie Van Halen answered, "Sammy is Sammy, and for the most part that's just fine." Roth persisted with suggestions of a reunion, saying, "People want the reunion, and no one will pay respect to what any of us do until we get the reunion out of the way." In May 2006, he told Billboard.com, "There's contact between the two camps." On June 3, Michael Anthony began a successful tour with Hagar billed as the other half, a reference to them being half of Van Halen with the other half being Eddie Alex, with Anthony singing lead vocals sometimes. Meanwhile, on June 19 the Van Halen brothers jumped on stage with Kenny Chesney at the Home Depot Center performing Jump, and You Really Got Me. This unusual performance was their first onstage since the 2004 tour. This was followed by another Eddie Van Halen performance on July 19, 2006, at the House of Petals in Los Angeles, playing new material. He followed this with an announcement on July 27, 2006, that some of his new music would be released on the soundtrack for the pornographic film Sacred Sin. In March 2006, Michael Anthony spoke to Japanese rock magazine BURN, claiming the brothers did not want him on the 2004 reunion tour, although Hagar did, and would not play without Anthony, but he had to agree to reduced royalties and end absolutely all association with the band after the tour in terms of rights to using the name to promote himself. It was in this same interview he admitted he was not involved in the new songs on Best of Both Worlds and only recorded 3 tracks for 3. On September 8, 2006, Howard Stern's Eddie Van Halen live interview broke the band's long silence. Eddie said he was willing to reunite with Roth and revealed a solo album in the works. Michael Anthony's departure was confirmed with Eddie's son, Wolfgang, taking his role. Wolfgang had played bass guitar alongside his father on some 2004 concerts. When queried about the other half tour, Eddie said Anthony could do what he wants now. This shocked and offended many fans. In November, Eddie's spokesperson, Janny Liszewski, claimed the Van Halen family was rehearsing for a summer 2007 tour, which Billboard magazine's website shortly confirmed. However, the Van Halen website remained in the state it had been in since the Hagar reunion. On December 11, 2006, Eddie Van Halen stated to Guitar World magazine that David Lee Roth had been directly invited to rejoin the band. However, on December 28, Roth announced that he had not talked to Eddie in 2 years, and a reunion with Van Halen could result in a Jerry Springer-style fight. In January 2007, Van Halen was announced as one of that year's inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Van Halen brothers, Anthony, Hagar, and Roth were inducted, though only Hagar and Anthony appeared at the induction ceremony on behalf of the group. Billboard announced on January 24, 2007 that Van Halen would reunite with David Lee Roth for a U.S. tour. This was confirmed shortly after on the official Van Halen website. The Van Halen news desk announced on February 15, 2007, that a Van Halen Best of 1978 to 1984, a single-disc compilation of Van Halen's David Lee Roth era, would be released by April 3. Shortly after, information arrived in a flood. Various sources claimed the tour was shut down, as was the new Best of CD. On March 8, 2007, Eddie announced on Van Halen's website that he was in rehab. Along with the announcement, a change was made to the website. The logo at the top of the page changed to the original Van Halen logo from their 1978 debut album. As the band's Hall of Fame induction drew near, media focus shifted to that. Velvet Revolver would induct the band and speak on their behalf. On March 12, 2007, the band was inducted at a ceremony held at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. Anthony and Hagar were the only inductees in attendance, ironically, both ex-members. Velvet Revolver played Ain't Talkin' 'Bout Love, and Anthony and Hagar performed Why Can't This Be Love with Paul Shaffer. At a post-induction press conference, Hagar said he would love to work with Van Halen again but that the Van Halens should tour with Roth first. On April 21, 2007, Eddie Van Halen served as an honorary race official for the Subway Fresh Fit 500 NASCAR Nextel Cup Series race at Phoenix International Raceway. On May 24 posted a note to the Van Halen website confirming that he had exited rehab successfully. After nearly 10 months of speculation and numerous rumors, Van Halen, and David Lee Roth separately via his own website, said that the band would be going on a tour of North America. Roth claimed in the press release that, "The idea is that this will continue on and on and also that a world tour and new album were in the works." Press reaction to the reunion was largely warm, but the redesigned website sparked controversy when Michael Anthony was removed from images of old album artwork. The album covers were reverted to normal a day later without a word. The fall 2007 tour was originally 25 dates, but was extended into 2008 with a second leg. Van Halen started their new tour on September 27, 2007, in Charlotte, North Carolina. Playing to sell-out crowds, the tour generated positive reviews. Amid rumors of Eddie being back in rehab, multiple dates of the tour were postponed. The official reason was the need for medical procedures to be run on Eddie. On March 5, 2008, World Entertainment Weekly to CBS News reported that the reason behind the tour stoppage was due to Eddie Van Halen needing to re-enter rehab. The report also indicated that it was a furious backstage bust-up in Florida with his 17-year-old son and bandmate Wolfgang, which motivated Eddie to seek help once again. In response to rumors about Eddie Van Halen being back in rehab, Valerie Bertinelli said that he is not in rehab. She did not, however, say if he had recently been in rehab, stating only that he wasn't currently, a statement echoed by Wolfgang Van Halen during the 2008 Kids' Choice Awards. Eventually, the tour started back up April 17 at the Reno Events Center in Nevada. The tour ended on June 2, 2008, at the Van Andel Arena in Grand Rapids, MI. During the show, Roth stated multiple times that this would not be their final show and that they would see everyone next time. At this show the arena sign was altered, as to read Van Halen Arena. According to the Van Halen news desk, the reunion tour with Roth was the highest grossing in the band's history, raking in almost $93 million. On July 3, 2008, Van Halen headlined the Quebec City Summer Festival in front of a crowd of 85,000.
A different kind of truth in Eddie's diverticulitis 2009 present.
In an interview with Guitar World, posted on November 12, 2008, about the making of his upcoming new EVH Wolfgang guitar from Fender, Eddie Van Halen said, "In regard to new Van Halen music, I'll be making music till the day I die. I've done all kinds of stuff, and more is coming. I can't tell you exactly when right now. Wolfgang is in the 12th grade and he needs to graduate first. Then I'm getting married in June. We'll pick it up after that." Eddie underwent surgery on his left hand in 2009, following some treatment for arthritis as he felt pain in his fingers during the 2007 tour. In an interview with Glide magazine's May 2010 issue, Dweezil Zappa commented that Eddie had played him new stuff from his record. It was not clear from the interview if the music was intended for a new Van Halen record. In August 2010, Warner Chappell Music extended its administration agreements with Van Halen, specifically Eddie and Alex Van Halen. Under the agreement, Warner Chappell will continue to administer their catalog of works. This press release also stated that the group is currently in the studio recording an album with Roth, that is due for release in 2011. Van Halen entered the Henson Studio C with producer John Shanks on January 17, 2011. Shanks posted on his Twitter account that he was in the studio with the band and posted a picture of one of Eddie Van Halen's signature amps. The new album would be the first full-length Van Halen album since 1998's Van Halen 3 and the first new music from the band since the 3 new songs from the 2004's Best of Both Worlds compilation. It would also be the first Van Halen album to feature Eddie's son, Wolfgang Van Halen, on the bass in place of Michael Anthony. This would also be the first full-length album to feature Roth on vocals in over 27 years, and the first new material with him in 15 years, since the 2 new songs with him on the Best of Volume I. It would also be the first recorded music from Roth since 2003's Diamond Dave. On June 16, 2011, Creed and Alter Bridge guitarist Mark Tremonti claimed that he was invited to 5150 Studios and that Eddie, Alex and Wolfgang Van Halen performed the album live, in its entirety, for Tremonti and Creed touring guitarist, Eric Friedman. Producer-engineer Ross Hogarth claimed on July 31, 2011, that the whole Van Halen record has been recorded. On September 5, 2011, it was reported that the mixing on the new album was completed in mid-August, and production had progressed to the mastering stage. Their official website was updated on December 26, 2011, announcing that tickets for their 2012 tour would be available starting January 10, 2012. On January 5, 2012, Van Halen played an intimate club gig at New York City's Café Ha, which received widespread praise from media and fans. On January 10, the band's first single, titled Tattoo, made its premiere on radio stations. The following week, the single debuted at number 67 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. The band's new studio album from Interscope Records, entitled A Different Kind of Truth, was released on February 7, 2012. It was Van Halen's first studio release since 1998 and first with David Lee Roth on lead vocals since 1984. On February 8, 2012, Van Halen performed a friends and family dress rehearsal at the LA Forum in Inglewood, California. The show featured many classics as well as several new songs from their latest release, A Different Kind of Truth, which was released officially the day before in the United States. Despite Van Halen's long layoff between studio albums, A Different Kind of Truth sold 188,000 copies during its first 6 days of release, debuting at number 2 on the Billboard 200 Albums chart. There was an overwhelmingly positive critical and fan response to A Different Kind of Truth, which helped to fuel the album's long run in the upper reaches of the US Billboard 200 Album chart. Additionally, it earned the band its highest-ever charting album in the United Kingdom, debuting at number 6. Despite an average ticket price of approximately $150, Van Halen's A Different Kind of Truth tour proved to be a commercial success as well, with nearly all U.S. arena shows, either sold out, or close to it. Critically, the band received mostly positive reviews, particularly when performing throughout the U.S. Northeast and West Coast. R&B legends Kool and the Gang were hand-picked by frontman David Lee Roth to open the first 2 legs of Van Halen's tour. On May 17, 2012, Rolling Stone magazine reported that Van Halen was postponing all tour dates after their June 26 show in New Orleans, Louisiana. Shortly thereafter, the Van Halen news desk revealed that the band's members were in good health, had not been arguing with each other, and that the reason for the postponed tour dates was to take a break after 18 months of non-stop recording and touring as well as to allow the group the opportunity to enhance its concert presentation before resuming the tour in the late summer of 2012. However, the postponed dates were officially listed as cancelled shortly thereafter. August 30, 2012. Eddie Van Halen was diagnosed with diverticulitis and underwent surgery, postponing the shows in Japan initially scheduled for November 2012. On April 20, 2013, the Roth-fronted Van Halen played its first show outside North America since 1984, and their first in Australia since 1998, at the Stone Festival in Sydney. This was followed by 1 show each in Tokyo and Nagoya, and 2 in Osaka, from June 18 to June 26.
Contract writers.
Van Halen had a notable effect on the modern rock music tour with their use of the concert technical contract rider. They were one of the first bands to use contract riders to specify a wish list, a practice now used throughout the music industry. They pioneered extensive requirements including power availability and stage construction details. The band's demands were not limited to technical issues. Their now infamous riders specified that a bowl of M&Ms, with all of the brown M&Ms removed, was to be placed in their dressing room. According to David Lee Roth, this was listed in the technical portion of the contract not because the band wanted to make capricious demands of the venue, but rather as a test of whether the venue had actually read and properly honored the terms of the contract, as it contained other requirements involving legitimate safety concerns. If the bowl was present, then the band members could safely assume the other, legitimate, items in the technical rider were being fulfilled to their satisfaction. Conversely, if the bowl was missing, or brown M&Ms were present, then the band members would be within their rights to have the venue inspect the work, ask it be redone, etc. Their concern for safety was real, as in their earlier tours, not only was equipment damaged, but several members of their road crew were nearly electrocuted, both due to inadequate safety and preparation on the part of the local venue.
Band members:
David Lee Roth, lead vocals, 1974 to 1985, 1996, 2006 present. Eddie Van Halen, lead guitar, keyboards, backing vocals, 1972 present. Wolfgang Van Halen, bass, backing vocals, 2006 present. Alex Van Halen, drums, 1972 present. Mark Stone, bass, backing vocals, 1972 to 1974. Michael Anthony, bass, backing vocals, 1974 to 2006. Sammy Hagar, lead vocals, rhythm guitar, 1985 to 1996, 2003 to 2005. Gary Cherone, lead vocals, 1996 to 1999.
Timeline. Discography:
Van Halen, 1978. Van Halen 2, 1979. Women and Children First, 1980. Fair Warning, 1981. Diver Down, 1982. 1984, 1984. 5150, 1986. OU 812, 1988. For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, 1991. Balance, 1995. Van Halen 3, 1998. A Different Kind of Truth, 2012.